in a minute, but I just wanted to make sure that you're in the right session. It's from New York to LA, New Goals for New Times. And we're going to talk about the A game. But before we start, we would just wanted to get an idea of who's with us. So if you could let us know what your role is in alternative education. We actually have 3 questions, and maybe if you don't mind, we'll take just a few minutes. And if you could just let us know who you are or your role, what your biggest measurement challenge is right now, and what factors make traditional measurement unreliable for you. So what is it, what are you struggling with right now as a school leader or an authorizer or a support organization? What is, and just who you are. So I'm just going to start by who's on the screen. So Tim Sattler, you're first. And if you wouldn't mind sharing who you are and why you're here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Spawn Sattler. I live in New Orleans, born and raised in Los Angeles, and been working in alternative high schools for about 10 years now. I'm currently a real-world learning coordinator at an alternative high school in New Orleans while doing my PhD on alternative education at the same time. One of our biggest challenges here in New Orleans is that the students are still being asked to navigate end of course exams that are graduation requirements. And we are having trouble getting exemptions or alternative portfolio options through with our local authorizers.
Jennifer Shore. Hi, Jen.
Good morning, Naomi. Well, actually, it's afternoon where I am.
Me too.
So I'm Jennifer Shore. I am the Associate Director at Buckeye Community Hope Foundation. We are an authorizer in Ohio. We have 10 AECs in our portfolio of 50. And I would say that, and I am also part of the A game, just in full disclosure. I would say our biggest challenge with our schools is the requirement for this growth measure that doesn't make sense for a lot of students. And in our state, there's a participation rate with that. And I think the thing that we still struggle with is capturing the right data to really tell.
Okay, Jennifer, you just got on mute.
What I said is one of the biggest challenges is just still capturing the right data to really tell the story of our schools and the work that they do without it diminishing accountability.
Yeah, that's very well said. Thanks. Terrence, you're next. Maybe I'll go to Nancy. And we'll do this pretty quickly from now on because there are more people joining. So if you can kind of limit to a couple seconds of introduction, then we'll get into our group. Terrence, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I had to unmute myself. Sorry. Yeah, my name is Terrence Mims. I'm the superintendent at SciTech, and I'm working on trying to figure out what several pieces of this alternative school environment with respect to serving at Promise Youth. We're working on our strategic plan, and so a lot of the questions that you all raised around like what should we be paying attention to show how we're performing as a system, but also we're working on figuring out what our success measures are for our internal accountability purposes. So just interested in hearing what you all have to offer here around assessments and ways of building great systems for students.
Love it. Welcome. Nancy.
Hi, Nancy here. I'm fairly new to SciTech, and I've been working for charters and for about 3 years, mostly in the administrative side. So I'm still learning about all of this. So I'm happy to be here and just learn some more about how students learn and some factors into that. So thank you for having this presentation.
Phil.
Hi, Diamond. Oh, Yeah.
Who am I talking to? Alexandra?
No, Phil Matero.
Hello?
Okay.
Alexandra,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Sorry. Okay, I'll go ahead. So Phil Matero with Youthville Charter School of California. Yeah, our biggest challenges with the measuring growth, we've worked out the grad rate here in California, but now it's more about growth measurements and demonstrating success, the successes our students are having outside of just standardized tests.
Thank you. Clint Howie. Okay, Nicole. Oh, sorry, Clint, can you? We can't hear you. I'll move on to Nicole and then come back. Nicole? We can't hear you either, Nicole. Perhaps we can use the chat if this is getting hard. I know Jody has access to the Wahuva chat, and you could add in a little bit about yourselves there. And we'll start in on the presentation just to get going. And then I hope that you'll be able to unmute yourselves if you have questions and if you want to get involved. This is certainly not meant to be a lecture. We'd really like it to be a communication. So I'm going to get going though a little bit on what we are, who we are. This is the A game is a joint project, a collaboration between Momentum, Strategy, and Research. And I should let you know, Jody, Dr. Jody Ahrens is on the Wahuva. She's monitoring our chat, so you can ask us any questions you'd like through that. And she is my co-partner in this work. We got a U.S. Department of Education grant to develop resources, a data hub, and an authorizer network, which is what Jen Shore is part of. And our hope was that we were going to be able to solve all the problems of alternative education campuses by measuring quality. And it looks like Jody just joined our group as well. I see your name. So the A game is launched in 2018. It's a 3-year grant. We are hoping that the initiative is a lot larger than the 3 years, so we'll be continuing for a while. We discovered that our work impacts not only AECs, but all schools. So at this point, we're also looking at what are we learning through the trouble in measuring quality in AECs that is actually also trouble in measuring quality in traditional schools, especially now that there are no state assessments to be used for last year and even this year. So very briefly, I come to you from the National Charter Schools Institute. I was an authorizer for quite a few years, about 7.5. And I was also worked for our charter advocacy organization for about 6 years and was a teacher in high schools. And so I come to this work with a lens around how do you measure the effectiveness that you have when our measurements that we currently use are insufficient. Jody, since you're with us, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to refresh to get into the Zoom and I didn't realize it. I'm Jody Ernst. I'm Vice President for Momentum Strategy and Research and co-partner here on the A game with Naomi. My background is primarily in research and data collection and accountability work, and have been doing that work for about 15 years now. So that's the lens through which I come, is very data driven and have worked with schools for a very long time. So Naomi and I kind of have this nice complementary perspective. She was previously an authorizer, and a lot of our work previously has been with schools. So we come with a good balanced understanding of both sides of the situation.
Just to give a shout out, we started with 11 authorizers, including Buckeye Community, where we were working together. I was at that point at the District of Columbia Public Charter School Board. David Frank was a member of the group through his work at the Regents or the New York State Education Department. And together, we really wanted to make a difference in how we as authorizers look at schools like yours that are alternative. And at this point, I'd love to introduce you to Delia Castillo from Los Angeles County Office of Education. She and David are both working with us in a partner or sense to try out our theory with school. So Delia, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, hello. Hello, everybody. My name is Delia Castillo, and I am a coordinator of the Charter School Office of the Los Angeles County Office of Education, also known as LACO. I previously worked in the Charter School Office of the Los Angeles Unified School District, where I started out as a teacher in 2000. And I'm from LA, raised, and I went through the K-12 public school system in LA. So I'm familiar with that urban area. And thank you for having us.
And Carrie Croft, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Croft. I'm the founder and founding principal of Da Vinci Rise High School. We are in our 4th year in Los Angeles. We are authorized by Los Angeles County Office of Education. We work really closely with Dr. Castillo. And our school serves primarily foster homeless, probation youth, and other students who have just been left out of the larger educational narrative, or who have had, faced obstacles in succeeding in more traditional schools. So I also started as a classroom teacher, taught high school English for a while, and then am currently still at Rise. Recently moved into a position of administrator on special assignment, looking more at policy change and sustainable funding for alternative schools.
And David Frank.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm David Frank, and I'm the authorizer for the New York State Education Department and Board of Regents here in New York State. We oversee 97 charter schools everywhere from Buffalo to Long Island, and we're the largest authorizer of overage undercredited, or AECs, here in New York State. And we're just excited to continue this work with Naomi and Jody, but also with our schools, and we'll talk a little bit about that later.
And then before we dive in, Lorna, I see you have your hand raised, so I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know, I think that the chat is disabled.
Yeah. Let me see if we can enable it.
So the chat should be
Jody.
used in Whova.
Yes. The chat in Zoom is disabled. You need to do the chat through the Whova app, and I am monitoring that for when the questions come up. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry about that. So measuring quality this is what we talked about before. I thought this is what we as authorizers, you as school leaders and as teachers and as support organizations see. You can see the difference when you walk through a classroom. The pictures on the left would represent a class or a school where you're just not seeing a whole lot of engagement, right? And then the pictures on the right are quite the opposite, where you're seeing a lot of engagement. However, what we find is, especially with alternative education campuses where all of the students or majority of the students are behind academically and are needing time to catch up and are not graduating in 4 years, that the report card for both of these schools could be an F or a D. And we see that, and yet we want to be able to quantify why is there a difference and how do we capture that difference. So we created a process that gets to creating goals that we think will capture the difference. And the biggest and most important step in this process, which we're going to walk through now together, is partnering with the school. So we've kind of really pushing that you partner with your authorizer as you move forward, so that you are working together, or if you're an authorizer, that you're partnering with your schools. It's not done in silo. So to start with, let's start with partnering with schools. And I'd love for Delia and Carrie to talk about what it means to partner and what that's feeling like for you as you're working with us on this work.
Yes, thank you. So this opportunity of partnering with our schools offers a unique opportunity, really, to improve the relationships and to understand where the school is going, to understand their mission, their vision, their priorities, and plan for how they're going to positively achieve student outcomes. And so while we have an opportunity as authorizers at the time of authorization, and then through monitoring, this process is a step beyond that, what's typically in practice. So it really is, we're hoping that it'll strengthen our partnership with we're working with two schools that are on the alternative, on the DAS model, as we call them in California. So we hope that this will yield some great results and strengthen our relationship and our partnership.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Castillo. I think that this partnership between the districts and the schools not only allows us to be on the same page with our authorizer and help the authorizer kind of more deeply understand the vision and mission of the school, but I think the other real benefit of this is ensuring that we're measuring outcomes that are relevant to our specific students' lives, needs, goals. And so it allows us to get really personalized and ensure that the very unique needs and circumstances of the students at our school are being elevated, and that we're building those kind of metrics and those outcomes around them, instead of force fitting them into metrics that maybe weren't made with them in mind.
David, I want to offer an opportunity for you to speak, and I noticed that Lisa is in the crowd, so I see you have schools here too.
Yeah, so we also completely agree. We're shifting to where we used to be solely focused on outcomes. We now know that as an authorizer, we need to also have a focus on community, and no one knows the community that we serve better than our schools. And so we're partnering with two AECs here in New York. One is New Dawn Charter High School, which has two charters, one in Brooklyn and one in Queens. And Lisa DeGuadio is here, who's along with Sarah Asmussen, are the school leaders. And then we're also partnering with a school on Staten Island called New Ventures. And we think that as we're doing this work, if we want goals and measures that are impactful and really speak to the success of students, as an authorizer, we need to understand what those students are going through and how those measures impact our schools. And so we're happy to work on this with both of those schools. And they're really, go to this slide, they're really working with us to look at both what are our mandated measures. So in state law, in our state's ESSA plan, what are we actually required to measure? So things like graduation rates, our high school exit exams, and then what are the things that are not required, and where do we have wiggle room? So we're, particularly with Lisa, who is great at pulling all sorts of data elements and really helping us think deeply about data. We're looking at what the best available data is, what do we have in our ESSA accountability plan, and helping to create a different framework for those schools that are serving overaged, undercredited students that thinks beyond those traditional measures. We think of them as not necessarily supplanting them, but supplementing them. And Lisa, I know you're here. I don't know if you wanted to add anything about the process that we're engaged in.
Sure. I think it's great that we get to work with David and with Jody
on this. This has been a long time in the making, and being able to really drill down to our students' individual needs, because they come in with so many different pathways and how they finish and the things that affect them. That really being able to take a look at all of those and then find the trends and see where we have the greatest impact is super important in this work. And so we're really looking forward to making sure that we're taking an accurate picture and looking at this in a real meaningful way, so that it's telling more than just like the anecdotal stories, but also really getting into the data and showing how significant it is and how impactful it is to our kids once they graduate and move forward as well.
Thank you, Lisa. And just, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on this slide, Delia.
Well, actually, Lori has her hand up, so I wanted to give her an opportunity.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just wondering how this partnership is interfacing with a school improvement plan.
Here in New York, charter schools are not subject to the school improvement plan requirements under ESSA. And so charter schools in New York are subject to improvement plans through their authorizer. However, we only require improvement plans for schools that are not meeting our standards. And schools like Lisa's at New Dawn, they're actually not only when we look at them within the context of the students that they're actually serving, not only are they meeting our standards, but they're far exceeding those standards. So they don't have an improvement plan necessarily. But it's certainly, we want to incorporate it as part of their performance plan, which is how we evaluate Board of Regents authorized charter schools.
And so for us in LA County in California, we are as we are working with our schools in this process during our discussions, we are aiming to calibrate, because we know that our schools have action plans, may have school improvement plans. In one case, one school is has been identified as eligible for differentiated assistance. And so knowing that there are different requirements and that those goals, whatever the school sets, need to be monitored, we're also trying to calibrate and make sure that as the schools are moving forward, that we're also considering those goals and whether or not they're going to be sufficient to address the different the different plans or the different objectives.
So as each authorizer manages their portfolio differently, I think what our goal, Jody and mine, behind all this is that we would create goals that become the charter contract goals and therefore become the school improvement goals. So this is the goal ultimately, is that this is the way that a school is held accountable for meeting its goals. And that would be the ideal end state. So David already sort of talked about the identifying current goals as our step one. One of the things that's really important to us is that we can't get rid of things. We don't spend time talking about 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. That's a federal requirement. None of us in this room have the authority to change that right now. So rather than discussing it, and as David so rightly put, we supplement that. We say, okay, here's the 4-year graduation rate. And then we're looking for other ways to actually challenge and meet that goal. In order to do that, the next process is to define which goals are non-negotiable and why. The ESSA is a good example of why something might be non-negotiable. I think, David, did you have any others that you want to kind of point out that might be non-negotiable for an authorizer?
So it's also those outcome measures. Like here in New York, we have a high school exit exam, and so what we used to do is we would say each year how many students passed and how many students did not pass. And that would be our measure. But working with schools like New Dawn, in addition to our other AECs, now we say, well, many of these students don't have experience sitting for these high stakes standardized exams. So instead of saying each year who's passing and who's not, all we're interested in is by the time that they graduate in their cohort, have they passed or not? And that puts the educational decisions on whether a student should sit for an exam or not back in the hands of educators. And we don't want to substitute our judgment for theirs. We want to set kids up for success, even if that success isn't the linear traditional way of operating. But just to build on what Naomi was saying, even if we do have some of these non-negotiables, we're trying to think outside the box and frame them in the context of the life and achievement of AECs, and compare other AECs to the work that's happening for with students that are typical of the population that they serve.
And then in our process of kind of analyzing the goals that are non-negotiable, we also look at the goals that we are saying we were going to move away from, and we specify what the current goals were meant to measure. So why are they in existence? Why does ESSA require 4-year graduation rate? Why do states require proficiency rates or growth rates? So Delia, I believe this is for you and Carrie.
Yes, so definitely, once we've gone through the process of articulating what the non-negotiables are, I think it better positions both parties, both the authorizer and the school leaders, to we're on the same page. It gives us a common lens, so that as we move forward, we continue to keep those non-negotiables on target, but also to move the work forward and identifying other alternative, the potential for incorporating other alternative goals as a school pleases or wishes to do so.
Carrie, do you have anything you want to add at this point in the process?
I think just kind of, underlining or reiterating the importance of, really specifying what the current goals are meant to measure for our alternative schools, knowing that our students are coming from such different backgrounds, and understanding that even some of the non-negotiables may not fully capture the different ways that our students are growing and learning. I think when we can really dig in alongside the authorizer and the supporters and say, what is it that we're really trying to get to right here? What is it that we're trying to measure and trying to show that our students are doing, how they're learning, how they're growing, not just academically, but also holistically. I think that this, both the defining of the non-negotiables and then the specification of what are we really trying to measure it's important for any students in any schools, but it's incredibly important for students in alternative schools who have really struggled amongst those traditional metrics to show that they were growing or that they were being successful.
And in that part of showing what they were meant to measure, then we get into the shortcomings. So what exactly why isn't it working for the school? So for the example of for a 4-year graduation rate, that's universally in all of our partnerships. What we've learned is, students are coming in well behind their peers. It's not in anyone's best interest to have them catch up and graduate maybe within a couple months of entering your school when they're so far behind. There's so many other pieces that need to be developed for that child to become an adult and a graduate of high school. So then we really drill in. What are some other, either David or Delia or Carrie, of the shortcomings that you've noticed in goals that were traditional goals and how they worked with your campuses?
I mean, for us, and Lisa actually might want to talk a little bit about those shortcomings, but we were comparing apples to oranges. We were expecting that students who came into a school like New Dawn that were 20 years old with no high school credits would perform the same way as a 14-year-old starting in a traditional school. And just the life circumstances and the outcomes of those two students are, it's common sense, really, right? They're going to be different. And what does success look like? But I talked to Lisa and Sarah about this a lot and their frustrations with that. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Lisa.
Sure. I mean, I think, for us, even going back to what you were talking about with like the nonlinear testing and everything else, we can have a student come in and, really kind of struggle at the beginning. And this is also part of the, capturing engagement and the impact of engagement on a student's trajectory is also, taking a snapshot of how they progress. And we have found that, when students are engaged with us more than 35% of the time, using attendance, using, their grades and their classwork, we can also see that once we get kids to pass 2 Regents exams, that timeline actually starts to speed up. So even if they are 20 or even if they're 17, getting them over that hub is significant to how quickly they then get to the finish line, as opposed to a student that may come to us with 0 credits and nothing accrued and be 19 and have to start all over again. It takes them a while to get into that mode of learning how to do school again. And so we're still, looking at all of those students in a meaningful way to look for those trends. And, those are one of the two things that we could talk about off the top of my head, in addition to, engaging them in the relationship building and using our mentor program, which has also had a significant impact in their engagement with us.
And I would add that the input that the school leaders have provided in identifying these and really just being honest about where some of these existing goals have fallen short, that has been invaluable, because oftentimes as authorizers, we may, as we're doing our reviews, our visits, at that point that's when we typically have conversations, but just having the leader sit in a trusting open space, right, where we're just able to really look and really look at each specific goal, metric, and outcomes, and really hear from the school leader and be very honest about that. I think also changes the way we interact with one another. So that to me has been one of the most valuable opportunities in this process is hearing Carrie. And then Carrie, if you don't mind, if you maybe have some additional observations to share, but that's definitely been one of the strengths of this process, I would say.
I agree. I don't know that I have much more to add on top of what our other colleagues have shared. I think we could give similar examples on, some of the shortcomings of traditional metrics. But I agree very much with what everyone else is saying. And I think it leads perfectly into this next slide, which is the importance of really being innovative and thinking about what metrics that we're using and really considering how some of the traditional means of measuring outcomes may fail to capture in a really holistic way the growth that our students are making. I really love what Lisa had to say about that engagement piece around when we're looking at attendance. When you're comparing it to a traditional school, some of our students' attendance may look really low, but it may be a huge growth from how much they were attending before. Or when we're looking at work completion, or even their willingness to attend case management meetings or counseling sessions with staff, their willingness to stay after school for after school programming, or their excitement about applying to internships. All of those different types of more holistic and comprehensive measures ultimately do lead to those academic outcomes. So how are we capturing those along the way? I think that those conversations have been really meaningful with the authorizers and the other schools involved in this process as well.
And I think the strength of this part of the process too is that it helps authorizers know that the schools aren't trying to get away with anything. They're not trying to escape accountability of any kind, which is sometimes the preconceived notion that some authorizers and some higher ups tend to have is that, oh, they just don't want to be held accountable. But when they hear these conversations about the technical issues and about what schools are putting forth as alternatives, they're like, oh, okay, they really do want to be held accountable to these things. It's just those other things aren't making sense. So I think that's one of the powers of this particular powerful things about this particular part of the process, especially going into brainstorming, other ways of measuring. David, did you want to talk about how you're perceiving the process of during the brainstorming sessions?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned most of it before, but we have learned so much just being open and vulnerable to saying, hey, we don't have all the answers as an authorizer. And I know of the authorizers I know, like Jennifer in here already, I'm preaching to the choir because they do this already. But coming together and as a community of educators, which is what we all are, to think through alternative ways to measure the same goal, or to think through impactful ways of supporting our students, it really yields results. And so when Tim was talking a little bit about the relationship with his authorizer, I hope that people will come to the table and say, hey, we have a lot to gain if we put aside our prior notions of what accountability and oversight looks like, and we think through this for the benefit of kids, because that's what it's all about.
So to really drive home the idea of what other ways to measure, as we're really trying to push people's thinking. So you heard some ideas of growth on attendance and growth on some of the engagement scores. One of the things that we're also looking at is some of our traditional measures like SAT or ACT or even acupuncture as the test for college entrance. And expecting, and I'm so sorry, my dog, the male is here right now. So that college entrance as a predictor for success in college. And one of the things that we're seeing in research is actually FAFSA completion rates have a much higher predictability to college completion or even enrollment. And so why not, and so many schools spend so much resources to help schools submit, fill out those forms. If any of you are parents of students who did this, it is a bear. And it is not easy when you have been filing your taxes. It is really hard when you haven't been, or you're trying to track down your parents to be able to get all this in. And schools have been really helpful in that process. And so once the student does this, the issue is you get funding right away. You find out how much of a loans you can get and how much actual scholarship money you can get. And this changes how close college is for you, because you can actually see or imagine that's something you could do. So this is an example of how we're really trying to push authorizers to think way outside the box on what it means to be holding a school accountable and what the goal is actually intended to measure, and different ways of measuring it. It doesn't always have to be a test. And the other thing I'm really focusing on is we rely on externally validated assessments. That's been that term out there for a long time. That's not necessarily why I ever became an authorizer, was to be a data manager. Why not create processes as an authorizer that externally validates what a school's doing? So can't we use GPA and externally validate that the transcripts are correct? Can't we use a change in attendance or something that isn't state reported, that the authorizer can create a process to validate that data and thereby really measure the school's work? And Jody is saying that there's a question in the chat. You want to read it?
Thank you. Yeah, so Rhett Nelson asked, you may have mentioned this, and sorry if I missed it, do you have ways to measure growth in these areas at the state level?
It's something that we're that's a great question. And it's something that we're working on. And so my fellow authorizers at SUNY, who are also part of the A-Game Consortium, we have 4 authorizers in New York. They're working, since they're a university authorizer, they're working to get information from the National Clearinghouse. It's something that we're trying to pursue at State Ed. But in a lot of state agencies, like New York, the higher education world doesn't necessarily talk to the K-12 world. And in engaging in this process, we're trying to change that, and we're trying to build those systems and supports. And to get to what Naomi said about being a data manager, having a great data team is just so important, not only as an authorizer, but as a school. Lisa, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me calling her this, but she's a bit of a data nerd, and she can pull the information that she needs, and she can come to us with actually hard evidence and to do some of the legwork of building those connections and those systems. Because if we don't have observable, measurable, replicatable, comparable data, a lot of the validity goes out the window. And I hate saying that, because we're talking about measures like social emotional well-being. And then here I come as the authorizer, sort of ruining the party, saying, hey, do we have a quantifiable measure for that? I think my colleagues at places like Castle would cringe, but that's the reality of authorizing.
Dahlia, do you want to talk about how California is handling growth measures?
Sure. In terms of looking at, so currently, because there's been a change in, well, the suspension of testing, the state has started or has identified some a list of verifiable data sources that can be used. And so also the importance of looking at internal benchmark assessments is something that we're also looking at, and grappling with that as to how schools can tell their story, because they do have access to different to a variety of different measurements or a variety of different methods that they can use, but we're looking at how to look at that how to look at what they present as in terms of whether they're demonstrating and being consistent, telling their story in how they're meeting those goals.
So the next part, in our last 15 minutes, we have a few more places that we go. We identify the student population by engagement phases. And this is a piece that is, we'll have Carrie and Delia talk about how they do this in their school and authorizer relationship. But one of the other pieces that's very important to this work is we recognize that students are, it's different. Every student is different. And we can put them into the level of being either fully engaged in school or partially engaged in school or disengaged. And it's those that are disengaged or partially engaged, which we're looking at creating other ways of measuring their progress. Those that are fully engaged or who are fully engaged and who are close to or at grade level, the traditional measures will work, right? It's these other populations, some of whom, some of your schools have 100% of your students are either fully or either partially or disengaged. And that's what makes you different from the traditional schools. However, even traditional schools have some students who are either partially engaged or disengaged. Disengaged often turn into dropouts, and then they show up at your school. So Carrie and Delia, do you want to talk about how you're identifying students right now by engagement phases?
Deli, I didn't know if you want to go first, because I know you've also had some continuing conversations with Dr. Ring and with Gloria, and then I can add to it. I know I can just say in some of the conversations we've had, because this is still fairly recent for us, joining A Game. This is our first full school year that we've been a part of this, and this is one of the aspects that I know as a school leader and as our leadership team we were most excited about, is really starting to define what those different categories are in terms of engagement, so that we can, to David's point, really look at how we are providing that data, not just the stories of our students, not just the qualitative pieces, but what is the data in terms of if a student comes to us straight from the juvenile hall, straight from the camps, and they're not attending at all, how do we show that growth when they start attending 2 full days a week and now are turning in assignments? That obviously is a huge win, but it's not by traditional means going to necessarily appear that way if we're using those traditional metrics. And so the conversations that we've been having are, what are those kind of quantifiers, or how do you define those different groups of students so that you can really get into the weeds, and also I think just get more personalized and looking at the individual students as much as possible when you are looking at the overall data. So Delia, I'm not sure if there's more you can add in some of the meetings that you've had with Dr. Ring recently.
So we are entering this process because we are working with 2 schools. So so we will be entering this piece, but we're definitely very interested in having this conversation, because as we know, students come with different different trajectories, different situations that create a need for this differentiated looking at their engagement through different phases, right? So we know that this is definitely something that we are also excited about, and we're just barely entering this this specific piece of the work. So I would say by January we should have gone through working with both schools and having a better idea as to what were some of the areas that needed additional discussion, or what was easier done, yeah. So we're looking forward to understanding this a little more.
I also just want to add really quickly the importance of having these different subgroups are getting more definitive when we're looking at where students are coming from, to the overall picture of ultimately getting them to meet the same bar that we're holding for other students. I think when students come in and they are really far behind, either in terms of credit attainment or achievement levels or Lexile levels, whatever it might be, to say we need you to get from here to this bar that we're holding all of the other students to in the same amount of time can also be really demoralizing for the students themselves. And that doesn't serve as a great motivator to make them continue to show up. And so I think the other really important thing about having these subcategories and really looking at how we're measuring different subgroups of students is that we can celebrate some of those wins. So when they go from not attending at all to attending several days a week, we can celebrate that. We can say that they are making growth, and then we can push them kind of to the next level, push them to the next bar. And so I think that it's incredibly important when we're looking at outcomes as a whole, and when we're looking at the ultimate measures, measurable pupil outcomes that we're pushing our students to and that we want to hold them to, because we know that they deserve that. I think that having these subcategories and kind of these bars along the way also is really important in ultimately ensuring that they meet that higher those higher metrics that we're wanting them to get to before they graduate.
To that point of higher metrics that Carrie talked about, the next phase of this work, which we're just entering into with some of our pilot groups, Jody and I have together 10 pilots across the country. We're in Missouri and in Atlanta, Colorado, so a number of different states trying to look at this. And one of the sort of final steps we take after we've identified the student populations, we create targets. One of them is an aspirational target, If you've moved students into groups, so now you've taken away the students, for example, who cannot, let's just take 4-year graduation rate. If you take away the students who come to your school out of cohort from that 4-year graduation, only include the new freshmen, you know, who come in on time or matriculate through your feeder middle school, then that can be, you know, those students as a denominator. The numerator could be, you know, a strong graduation rate, maybe a 90% graduation rate. And so we keep a high target, 90%, but we've moved the denominator to be only those students who are actually eligible to do that. For the students who are already then behind, maybe it's a 5-year graduation rate. And now that denominator is, again, both the 4-year students and the 5-year students, those students that come to you 1.5 years behind, but you think with an extra time you can do that. For students who are disengaged, and by this we mean students who come to your school on that one day, maybe with a parole officer, maybe you know, with their parent, and then they do not come again, and you find out their cell phone doesn't work and their address doesn't exist, and they're still on your roster, and you try and search them down. Graduating within 4 or 5 years may not be a reasonable position for you to be in. We tend to look at things like when they're eligible to be a senior, so they have enough credits, it's the leaver rate, that they would graduate that year, so that you're looking at them saying, okay, they've hit, you know, they have their X number of credits, they need 6 more. And if you successfully get them to focus and do those 6 credits, that would give you credit. So we're playing around with the idea of an aspirational target that's really high, not what we've seen historically is saying everyone needs to just have a target, and we'll lower the target based on your population, but we're going to keep the measurement the same. That's what we're taking. That's where we're rejecting that idea and replacing it with let's be more creative.
At 5 o'clock?
Make sure you're on mute if you're on this. Thank you. Delia, David, Carrie, anything to add to this target conversation?
I think you covered it.
Okay. Jody, do you want to introduce best available data?
Sure, I'll try to go quickly. We have 7 minutes left. So a number of you who have seen Jim or I present at this conference over the last 7 years have heard us talking about this database for a very long time that we collect of AECs. And through this grant, we have been able to really ramp up the robustness of the performance data that we've been able to match. So this is all data that is based on alternative schools only across the country. We obviously cannot, it's much more difficult to get data on programs. So this is largely school level alternative school data, and varies on which assessments are done across each state. So you see the maps with colors, that means that those have data, but we have data on graduation rates, 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, up to 7-year, state standardized tests, so proficiency rates in ELA and math largely, but a couple in science and social studies. Some attendance metrics include chronic absenteeism, average daily attendance, truancy rates, where we have states with college entrance exams like ACT and SAT. We're able to show average scores among AEC students, and then we have both event dropout and cohort dropout rates in a variety of states. This is all available on the National Center, NCES's website under A-Game. And at this point, it's all publicly available data. So this is available for you all to use to see what's going on in your state as far as AECs are concerned and across the country. And you can filter by subgroups and urbanicity in many cases. So it's a really interactive tool that allows you to drill pretty far down into how alternative schools are performing in general.
Sorry. Do not mean it to go twice ahead. So finally, at the very end, and I'm just going to run through this, before we present it to a public, we go through a phase where there's a veto, where there's an opportunity for the authorizer or the school to say, I'm really not comfortable with the way that this goal is finally worded and I don't want to go forward with it. We think that's really important process in this work so that we don't just move forward and without getting, we can be as creative as we want with our measures in our brainstorming sessions, and we can take it all the way through and then still know at the end that we can refine that list and remove those goals that just don't seem to really resonate fully. And then after we've refined the list, we definitely want to gather in and incorporate student voice or community voice. We often recommend bringing it back to the students at the school, the families at the school. We want their input and to make sure that that they understand and that they've shared their ideas. And at that point, we may go back to the brainstorming part again and revisit some of our goals and revisit the process to make sure our final list is a really strong list for everybody. And then the end of it is we were going to measure quality so that there's an agreement that this goes into the charter application, the charter agreement or contract, or this gets put into a framework for the alternative education campuses in that portfolio, so that this wasn't an exercise in futility, but really an exercise in creating new goals that are responsive to your student populations and your mission and vision and the program that you offer. So I see we have 3 minutes left, so not a whole lot of time for questions. Hopefully we were able to ask as we went along, but if there are any final questions or comments from my colleagues or you in the audience or my colleagues on the panel, happy to hear.
There's a couple questions. Tim asked, is the best available data norm to the same methods for data collection or just presentation of what states are using? It is a presentation of what states are using, but each, and to the extent possible, each metric that we provide, such as ADA, the only ones presented in the ADA averages are states using ADA, for example. So there, definitely with respect to proficiency rates, it's on the state standardized assessment. So you have to understand that those aren't the same. So with those caveats, yeah, they're definitely what's being used in the state. And to Lori, I'm not sure where in the Whova app, perhaps Nancy can answer the question of where slides will be provided to attendees.
Yeah, from my understanding is that they should be posted on the site. So if they're not there now, they should be by the end of today.
Great, thank you. That's it for questions.
Well, and that's it for us. Any last comments?
Thank you all for coming, and the A game has another session in the next accountability slot. So,
well, we'll go over the tools.
There.
That'll be about the data.
We'll go over the tools. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you have questions about the data tools, we're going to dive into that in 15 minutes. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks, Delia. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.